Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about angle relationships and solving equations. This is day number 2. Our content objective is students will be able to solve equations involving angle relationships. Language objective is students will be able to state verbally the relationship between the angles. And why am I learning this? Well, it's important for real-world problems like making mirrors in a submarine for periscopes. So first and foremost, let's go over some background knowledge to kind of remind ourselves of different characteristics and relationships of certain angles. So first, let's recall vertical angles. Vertical angles are created by two intersecting lines. So I'm going to go ahead and annotate on top of these images so that you can see which are congruent to which. And I'm going to do it slightly different than normal. So here I'm just going to go ahead and say, okay, here A and A are vertical angles. The only reason why I'm doing this is so you can quickly see which angles are congruent to one another. You typically wouldn't annotate it like this. Here I would also say B is congruent to B. These are vertical angles. They're across from one another. Here, if I called this C, I would call this angle C as well because they're across from each other. And if I called this D, then I would go ahead and call this one D as well, just to show you once again that these angles are congruent. Because vertical angles, most importantly to understand, is that they are congruent to one another. What about supplementary angles? Supplementary angles basically create 180 degrees, which means they create a straight line if you were to match them together. Here you can clearly see that this is a straight line. Now, what's creating the straight line? Well, you might say that is being created by this angle here combined with this angle. So I would say these two angles combined are supplementary, which means they add up to 180 degrees. Now, are there different variations of it? Absolutely. You can even see yet another one here. You can see that this angle combined with this angle also created this straight angle which measures 180 degrees. Okay, here yet again, here's a straight angle. Now what created this straight angle? I mean, it depends on how you look at it. You can see that it's created by this angle combined with this one and combined with this one, or you could have seen that it was made by this angle combined with this angle. So it totally depends on which way should you use it, what's going to be more helpful for you. There's actually another one as well. There's this one right here. You can see that this one's created by these three angles. 1, 2, 3. Those combined give you 180, or you can look at it like so. Those combined also made 180 degrees. So it just depends on how you see it. Okay, then last but not least, this one here is your exterior angle of a triangle. Because if you notice, here's the triangle. All of these would be interior angles, but the one outside would be your exterior angle. Hopefully you recognize that there is also a straight line right here, and which was created by this angle along with this angle. So I would definitely say that this is 180 degrees. Now what about corresponding angles? Again, I'm going to go ahead and use letters to kind of quickly show you which corresponds to which. So here we have A, B, C, D. I'm going to repeat that within this area here and put this as A, B, C, D. Here you can clearly see A corresponds to A, B corresponds to B, C corresponds to C, and D corresponds to C. Now, what's so important about corresponding angles? Well, corresponding angles are congruent, which means A is congruent to A, B is congruent to B, etc. Now, what about alternate interior angles? Well, alternate interior angles, well, exactly like the name says, it's the interior. Interior of what? The interior of the parallel lines. So if you were to focus on the parallel lines, the interior would be on the inside. So since it's alternate interior angles, every single location needs to be the opposite. So here if I put A, that's on the top left. I'm going to do the opposite. Instead of doing the top, I'm going to do the bottom. Instead of doing the left, I'm going to do the right. So it's going to be A down here as well. And then we have B here and B here. So again, they're interior angles on the inside of the parallel lines. Alternate meaning one's on top, the other one's bottom, one's left, one's right. And that's it. So what's so special about alternate interior angles? Well, when the lines are parallel, we know that these angles are also congruent. Okay, what about alternate exterior angles? Well, just like before, you're going to go ahead and focus first on the parallel lines. Okay, in this case, since it's exterior angles, I'm not going to focus on the inside. I'm actually going to focus on the outside. So here, since it's alternate, same idea. If I put A as the top left, I'm going to have to put A at the bottom right. Here, B is top right, so B would be bottom left. So what do we know about alternate exterior angles? Well, once again, when the lines are parallel, we know that they are congruent. Okay. Now, same side interior angles. Once again, since it's interior, let's go ahead and focus our attention on the inside of the parallel lines. Since it's same side, we're going to actually look at the same side. So A, notice I don't want to put A here because this will actually be supplementary. That is already a certain type of relationship. I'm actually going to put A down here. So there's A and A. Here's B and actually, you know what? I would like to fix this. I wouldn't want to call it A and A. I want to call this maybe A, D, and B, F. So this time, notice I didn't use the same exact variable because it's kind of misleading. If I use the same variable, you would think that they're the same measurement, which they're not. So in this case, I would say angle A and angle D are same side interior angles. Which means, first of all, again, understand they're not congruent. They're actually supplementary. So A and D are supplementary, which means the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle D is supposed to equal 180 degrees. Same thing with B and F. They are same interior angles, same side interior angles. I should put side here, same side interior angles. And for those reasons, you can say that angle B plus angle F is going to give you 180 degrees. So just be very careful with that. Complementary angles basically means that the angles add up to be 90 degrees. You can see this little symbol here. This means this angle is 90 degrees, which means this angle combined with this angle should add up to 90. Here, the triangle sum theorem. Basically, what you need to understand is it states that all interior angles, basically the inside of these angles, will add up to a total of 180 degrees no matter how big, how small, or medium. And it does not matter which kind of triangle you draw. As long as it has three sides, all the interior angles will always add up to be 180 degrees. So now let's go ahead and start practicing some problems using all of the stuff that we've talked about and what characteristics they have. The first thing I like to do is decide between the missing variables which one's easier to find. So in this case, is it easier to find X or easier to find Y? First, I hope you see that it's nearly impossible to figure out Y because there's not enough information, which forces me to consider maybe I should try to figure out X first. And guess what? There is enough information to figure out the value of X. How? Well, I know that all interior angles of a triangle should add up to 180 degrees. So guess what? That means 35 plus 80 plus X should equal 180 degrees. Now I have an equation. I can go ahead and solve for X. 35 plus 80 is 115, so plus X equals 180 degrees. Simply subtract 115 from both sides, and you would be left with X equals 65 degrees. So now I know the value of X is 65 degrees. Is this enough for me to figure out Y? The answer is yes, because I also know that the angle of X combined with the angle of Y are supplementary. They form this straight line. Guess what? Supplementary angles are equal to 180 degrees when you combine all of them together. So now that I know the value of X, I'm not going to call it X anymore. I'm going to go ahead and call it 65 degrees plus Y is going to be 180 degrees. So to solve for y, simply subtract 65 from both sides, and I'm left with y equals 115 degrees. So to answer the question, I would say x is 65 degrees and y is 115 degrees. And that would be my answer. So now with that, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and pause the video and try number 2 on your own. So what I'm going to do is now show you how I got my answers. Now, is it possible for you to have gotten the answer using different relationships? Absolutely. As long as your answers are exactly the same as mine, that's all you need to know. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is say, okay, I know the value of y. The value of y is 120 degrees. Why do I know this? Because I know vertical angles are congruent. Now, because of that, I'm able to also figure out the value of x. Why? Because here, the angle of y combined with the angle of x form this straight angle, which means these angles are supplementary, which then means they should equal 180 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and write x plus 120 degrees should equal 180. So to solve for x, I'm going to subtract 120 from both sides, leaving me with x equals 60 degrees. So now I know x is 60 degrees. So I'm going to write that x is 60 degrees. Now, by knowing this, could I figure out what z is? No, not quite. However, if I'm able to figure out this angle, I would be able to figure out z. So how do I figure out this angle? Well, I can focus on the triangle, but I would need a little bit more information. I would at least need to know this angle, which guess what? I can easily do. Because this is 60 degrees, and this also has to be 60 degrees. Why? Because the vertical angles are congruent. So notice here, in order to get to z, I actually need to figure out what this angle is. So I'm just going to call it a for right now. Because if I can figure out a, I can definitely figure out z because these angles are supplementary. So here, I can see that this here is a triangle. And guess what? Using the triangle sum theorem, I do know that all interior angles of a triangle should equal 180 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and write that 60 plus a plus 50, so these were the interior angles of the triangle, is supposed to equal 180. I'm going to combine like terms, leaving me with 111 plus a equals 180. Subtract 110 from both sides, and I'm left with a equals 70. So here, now I know the value of a is 70 degrees. So again, guess what? Now I know that angle z and angle a, which we know is 70, are supplementary because they form this straight line. I can go ahead and set up my equation as 70 plus z is 180 degrees. So simply subtract 70 from both sides, leaving me with z equals 110 degrees. So here are my missing angles. So notice for this one, as you worked it out, hopefully you saw that you did fill in extra information that they didn't necessarily ask for, but it was essential to figuring out some of the other missing angles like z. So hopefully these were the same answers as yours. Again, you might have went a different route to finding what is what, but you should have ended up with the same exact answers as I did. Okay, now my turn. Let's try 3. So real quick, once again, I like to do vertical angles first just because it's real quick and simple to see. This angle here is the matching set for vertical angles would be angle x. So I know since these are vertical angles, x has got to be 35 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and put x equals 35 degrees. Now what I'm going to do is figure out the value of y. How? Well, I can't really use this triangle to help me out because we're missing 2 different angles, which is not going to be helpful. But I do see that this angle here combined with y does form this straight line. which means these angles are supplementary. So I'm going to go ahead and set it up as y plus 95 equals 180 degrees. So simply subtract 95 from both sides, and I'm left with y equals 85 degrees. So here, this is 85 degrees. Now, could I go ahead and find z? Not quite. In order to find z, I do have to find this angle first. So let's just go ahead and give it a variable. I'm going to call it b this time, just to prove to you it really doesn't matter what you pick. It doesn't always have to be a, doesn't always have to be b, as long as it's not a y, x, or z, because those are already being used. So here, I know that this here is a triangle. And once again, all interior angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. So I'm going to write b plus 85 plus 35 equals 180 degrees. We're going to combine these together and end up with b plus 120 equals 180. Subtract 120 from both sides, and I'm left with b equals 60 degrees. So let's just make this b look like 60. There you go. So wait, now that I know that angle, I'm able to figure out the measurement of angle z. Once again, these are supplementary, which means when you combine them, they're going to form a straight line of 120 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and set it up as z plus 60 equals 180 degrees. 180 degrees. So subtract 60 from both sides, leaving us with z equals 120 degrees. So now I know z is 120 degrees, and almost let's not forget the angle measurement for y is 85 degrees. So that would be our answer for those. Okay, so now moving on. I would like you to go ahead and pause the video so you can go ahead and try number 4 by yourself. Okay, so let's see how well you did. So I'm going to go ahead and do the method I would choose. Again, could it be different than what you did? Absolutely. So let's go ahead and see how well you did. So first, I'm recognizing that there's no way I can figure out what angle X is. However, there is a way to figure out angle B. How? Well, I see that this angle here of 160 degrees is vertical angles with this 40 and B, which means these angles are congruent. So for those reasons, I'm going to set my equation up as 60 equals both of these angles combined, the 40 along with angle B. So now, just to solve for B, I'm going to subtract 40 from both sides, leaving me with 120 degrees equals B. So now I know that measurement of angle B is 120 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down as part of my answer. B equals 120 degrees. Now I need to figure out X. So how in the world am I supposed to do that? Well, hopefully you recognize that this is a straight line, which means this angle, X, combined with this angle 40, combined with this angle 120, should equal 180 degrees because they are supplementary. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. I'm going to say X plus 40 plus 120 equals 180 degrees. So I'm going to combine like terms and say this is X plus 160 equals 180. Subtract 160 from both sides, leaving me with X equals 20 degrees. So here, to answer my question, I'm going to say B equals 120 degrees and X equals 20 degrees. And that would be my answer. So hopefully you got those right. So now moving on to one for me. So here we go. First, as always, I love to do vertical angles first because I think it's really simple. I'm going to say this X is going to be 97 degrees. Why? Because vertical angles are congruent. So I'm going to go ahead and write angle X is 97 degrees because vertical angles are congruent. Now, I do want to recognize these little tick marks on the lines. those tick marks tell us that this line here is parallel to this line here. Which means a few things. I do know from parallel lines that corresponding angles are congruent, that alternate interior angles are congruent, and alternate exterior angles are congruent, as well as same side interior angles are supplementary. Now, the one I find to be the most useful is going to be alternate interior angles. This alternate interior angle and this one are congruent. So let me just highlight it real quick so you can get a better idea of what angle I'm looking at. This angle here is congruent to this angle here. Why? Because the lines are parallel. So guess what? There's no calculations involved at all. Because this one's 31 degrees, I know A is also 31 degrees. Because alternate interior angles are congruent. So here I'm going to say A is 31 degrees. Now guess what? I can repeat this process on the other side. Or can I? Well, I could, but let's see. This angle Y is congruent to this angle B. Now, is this helpful? No. Why? Because I don't know the value of Y and I don't know the value of B. So how could I figure it out? Well, going back to what we normally would do, we can go ahead and once again recognize, oh look, there is a triangle. What do we know about triangles? All the angles add up to be 180 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and create an equation. I'm going to say Y plus 97 plus 31 is going to equal 180 degrees. So we're just going to combine like terms here, leaving us with Y plus 128 equals 180. Subtract 128 from both sides, leaving me with Y equals 52 degrees. So now that I know that Y is 52 degrees, that tells me a little bit more information, doesn't it? It also tells me that B is also 52 degrees since they are alternate interior angles. Now the last one I need to find is K. How am I supposed to figure out K? Well, I'm just going to clear some of these things a little bit so to make things a little bit neater. So we figured out this is 97, this is 52, and this is 52 as well, and this here is 31. So how do I figure out K? Once again, hopefully you recognize that these lines are supplementary. This angle K and this angle 97 pair up to make this straight line. So I can go ahead and set up my equation as 97 plus K equals 180 degrees. So simply subtract 97 from both sides. And I'm left with K equals, let's see, 83 degrees. And those are the answers. So with that example, I would like you to go ahead and apply everything you know and try number 6 by yourself. Okay, so let's see how well we did. Here, first, I want you to recognize that this line here, whoa, I'm erasing stuff. This line here is parallel to this line here, and I know this because of the tick marks. And whenever we have parallel lines, we know a few things. We know corresponding angles are congruent, we know alternate interior angles are congruent, and we know alternate exterior angles are congruent. Okay, so let's take a look. Well, it looks like the only angle they gave us was this right here, which is 50 degrees. Wait, notice if you look on the inside of the parallel lines, this here is the alternate interior angle to 50. So since these are alternate interior angles, I know the measure of angle X has got to be 50 degrees because alternate interior angles are congruent. So I'm going to go ahead and write X equals 50 degrees. Okay, so well, now that I know that, I can figure out that angle Y, well, these are supplementary, X and Y, so these should add up to 180 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and set it up as 50 plus Y equals 180 degrees. If we subtract 50 from both sides, we end up with Y equals 130 degrees. So now I know Y is 130 degrees. Guess what? Since y is 130 degrees, what else has to be 130? A does, because these are vertical angles. So I'm going to go ahead and write that A is also 130 degrees. So how am I supposed to figure out K? There's two things you can do. You can say corresponding angles are congruent. K is congruent to Y. You can say alternate exterior angles are congruent. So A is congruent. Is this A? Yeah. A is congruent to K. Or you can say, okay, well, these lines are supplementary, so you can work it out. Now, would you want to do supplementary over figuring out which ones are congruent? I wouldn't say so. I would want to go ahead and say either corresponding or alternate exterior. You're going to get the same exact answer with less work. So I'm going to go ahead and say K has got to be 130 degrees. Okay, so now my turn. I'm going to go ahead and explain another problem for you, and then you'll get to try the very last one on your own. Okay, so here we have two sets of parallel lines. We have this one with the two tick marks. So those lines are parallel. But we also have these lines, which are parallel with the one tick mark. So this is different. Let's see if you can handle it. With parallel lines, we know a few things, right? We know that alternate interior angles are congruent. Okay. We know corresponding angles are congruent. We know alternate interior angles are congruent. We also know same side interior angles are supplementary. So first of all, I want you to recognize that this angle here will add up to 180 degrees. So let's go ahead and figure out what y is first. So y plus 102 equals 180 degrees. Now, would some of you go in a different order? Some of you will, and is that okay? Absolutely. So here I have y equals, let's see, 78 degrees. So now that I know that, what else do I know? Well, I will know that corresponding angles are congruent. So guess what? If this here is 78 degrees, this angle here also has to be 78 degrees. Okay, so if you don't believe me, let me show you real quick. I'm going to erase the colors. Okay, so if this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and I number this again, 1, 2, 3, 4, I already figured out y is 78. So in that case, it means this angle is also 78 degrees. Okay? So why would I want to do that? Why would I want to say that this angle is 78 degrees? Mainly because if I know this angle, don't I know B? I do. It is also 78 degrees. Okay, so now what else? Here we have alternate interior angles. I'm not sure if you recognize this using these parallel lines here. Now with that, I'm going to continue this. I'm going to find all corresponding angles. This is also 78 degrees. This corresponds to this location, so this is 78 degrees. Guess what? This also has to be 78 degrees because vertical angles are congruent or corresponding angles are congruent. So A is also 78 degrees because these angles correspond to another, or this one, whichever you want to look at it. So now I know A is 78 degrees. What else? Well, the only one we have to figure out now is K. Okay, so I know that these angles are supplementary, which means K plus 78 should equal 180. So if you solve for K and subtract 78 from both sides, you end up with K equals 102 degrees. So here we go. K is 102 degrees, and that's it. So now, would some other people use different characteristics, maybe alternate interior, alternate exterior? Yes, and that's okay. I just did corresponding because it's easy for me. Now, it's totally subjective. You do what you feel is easiest for you. Okay, so now pause the video and try number 8 on your own. Okay, so number 8 is a little of a doozy. So I might possibly go in a different order than you, And once again, that is okay as long as you get the same answers as me. That's all that matters. So the first thing I'm going to do is go for corresponding angles. I'm going to say this angle corresponds to this angle. Well, guess what? Since this is 90 degrees, y has also 90 degrees. Well, what else? Well, I'm also going to state that this angle, here is supplementary to this angle here, because they form a straight line, which means if this is 90 degrees, m plus 90 is 180, which means what does the measure of m have to be? 90 as well. So I'm going to write m equals 90 degrees. Okay, where else can I go from here? Well, I forgot to mention this. I apologize. I'm able to do this because these lines are parallel. They're marked as so with these tick marks. So guess what? These two angles are corresponding. But guess what? That's not enough information for us to figure out what N and what D is. But if this is 40 degrees, that means angle D is also 40 degrees. So I'm going to write that in. D equals 40 degrees. And like I said earlier, this is 90 degrees because it is corresponding to angle M. So I'm going to go ahead and write that, hey, 40 plus N should equal 90 degrees. So if you subtract 40 from both sides, I'm left with N equals 50. Okay, so we have D equals 40, N equals 50. We already have Y is 90. We need to figure out what B, A, and K are, as well as T. Okay, I'm just going to clear some space first. Okay, so how can we do this? Well, I can say vertical angles are congruent. Why would I say that? Because these angles are vertical angles. So if this is 90 degrees, this has to add up to 90 degrees as well. Or actually, I can make things easier for myself and say if this is 50, B is also 50 degrees because vertical angles are congruent. So B is 50. Okay, now from there, if this is 90, this is 50, I can go ahead and take a look at the triangle on the inside to figure out the measurements of angle A. So here I would put 90 plus 50 plus A is 180 degrees, which means 140 plus A equals 180. Subtract 140 from both sides and A equals 40 degrees. Okay, now sometimes after I do the work I realize something. And I'm not sure if you saw this, but it would have been easier to recognize that D corresponds to A, and I could have easily figured out that A has got to be 40 degrees as well, but I did a little bit extra work, and that's okay. So here we can go ahead and say K is also 40 degrees since K and A are vertical angles. And then last but not least, in order to find the measurement of angle T, I am going to go ahead and say that these lines are supplementary. So since K is 40, T plus 40 is 180. Subtract 40 from both sides, leaving me with T equals 140 degrees. So there we have it. And again, there's so many different ways to get the same exact answer, but no matter which way you go, all of these answers should be the same. So that is actually going to conclude the lesson for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, until next time, bye.